Hey everybody, it's Dr. Karen, and today I wanted to address a question that I get very frequently from both educators, therapists, and parents who want to improve different skills in kids. And that question is, what app should I be using to address X skill? Depending on the skill that that parent is working on, they might want an app for improving their kids' vocabulary, improving their language skills, improving some other academic skill. And also, I've heard questions about improving things like um, just mental health, helping them become more calm and focused, looking for things like a meditation app and anything like that. And that is becoming more prevalent than ever right now because a lot of us are stuck at home and we are having a lot more screen time than we were before, and we're also a little stir crazy. So I know that as a parent, sometimes you just want to have your kids do something that is productive, but also that allows you to have some downtime as well. So, if that sounds familiar, and if you have been looking for different apps that you can use with your kids to build language, attention, and other skills, I have some good news and I have some bad news. So, I'm going to start with the bad news first, and then I am going to move along to the good news and share a little bit about what you can do. So, obviously, the bad news is if your first question is, what app should I use to build my kids' attention, language, and focus? My first response would be that you probably shouldn't be using an app to build those things, or at least you shouldn't be depending on an app to build those skills. Um, for obvious reasons, we know that if you're working on attention and focus, and if you're working on language as well, then number one, neurologically, looking at a device and looking at a phone and the nature of what we know about all the different apps on phones with, you might be on one app and then you get a notification for the other app. We know that they're addictive and that they can kind of suck you in and make you lose track of time. And adults without attention issues can even get sucked into that because of the addictive nature. So that's the bad news, is that using an app and depending on an app for things like that can be problematic because of those reasons. And we know that neurologically, looking at a device has an impact. It makes you more dependent on a lot of stimulation in order to be able to focus. So there are actually other things that you can do that are more productive when it comes to improving those skills in your kids. And then the other thing is that apps are fine when they're used the right way, but again, there are a lot of other things that you can do that are super simple and things that you can work into your daily routine and that actually are going to get you better results when you work on those types of things besides an app. So again, I'm not against technology, I'm not against apps, but I think that they should be used in the right context and they shouldn't be used as a band-aid for a replacement for the skills that you're actually teaching. So let me share a couple things that you can do with your kids that are going to help to increase their attention and focus, and also that are going to help build language skills and things that are going to help your kids academically, and also that'll just help with your relationship as well. And then I'll talk about some things that if you do want to use apps as a way to amplify what you're already doing, some different things that you can think about. And I am less about specific name brands and I'm more about paying attention to the features of the apps. And if you are looking at different types of technology, what you can look for, because honestly, I'm posting this video in January 2021. There's going to be a whole bunch of different new apps and iterations of things in a couple months. So I think it's more important to focus on the features of all the different tools that you're using rather than specific name brands. So when it comes to things like attention, focus, and language development, one of the most powerful things that you can be doing to build your child's vocabulary and language skills, and this is true regardless of the age, one of the things that you can be doing is making sure that they are engaging in a lot of reading. What happens is, so number one, if you're looking at a book and not an app, that is something that requires sustained focus. So the mere act of sitting and reading just requires you to unplug and focus and just sustain attention to a task. And if you're doing it on Kindle is probably fine. A real book is probably the best case scenario. So that is actually going to improve attention span if it's just getting you off a device and teaching you to sit still and be used to looking at something that doesn't have a lot of stimulation. So you can actually improve focus that way, just putting yourself in a situation that doesn't have a lot of distractions and requires you to practice focusing on things. When we're on our phones, it's really easy to be reading one thing and then jumping to this thing and then jumping to that thing, and you can get used to needing to do that. But if you put yourself in a situation where you have to practice the skill of attending, that can actually improve your ability to attend. It's kind of like building a muscle. So just the mere act of sitting and focusing and reading can actually improve attention and focus. Now, depending on the age of your child, how that looks might be a little bit different. So if you have a young child, that would probably involve you reading to them and having a discussion about what you're reading. So just them sitting there listening to you read, or you taking turns reading, again, that is a task that requires sustained focus. And then if you have an older child, maybe they're reading independently, and maybe you're just checking in with them and seeing, if they can tell you about what they read. That's what I do with my middle schooler. And sometimes she still likes for me to read to her if she's tired, at the end of the night. Sometimes we'll read together, and sometimes she's like, can you just read the next couple of pages? And so I'm like, okay, sure, fine, So that might look a little bit how you do it if you have a child who is a little bit older. And then if you have someone who is a teen, that might look even different. Maybe they're doing it independently, and maybe you're just sitting there as a family, and it's like we're just all going to turn off all of our devices, and we're just going to sit here and read and be quiet for however long, 30 minutes or whatever. So that is how it might look if you have an older child. So obviously the ideal situation for that would be reading an actual book, and doing it that way. But I know that there are a bunch of different things that might come up depending on your situation and your child's profile. And there might be times when it is hard for you as a parent to sit down and actually sit there and make sure that your child is reading and things like that. And the other thing to take into account is that if you have a child who does have a hard time paying attention, they might not be able to just sit for 30 minutes. You might have to start with just a couple minutes at a time and work up to that. And that is really important to do. But for your own sanity, you might want to have some other things layered in that are also going to work on attention and focus and language aside from that. So I will get to a couple options for that in a minute, but I also wanted to talk about language because I do get questions about, all right, what's a good app to build my child's language skills? Well, the best way to build your child's language skills is to have them be exposed to rich language in functional, interactive environments. And in an app, it feels interactive, but it's really not. And so that's actually not the best context to learn a language skill. Reading with your child and having a conversation does a number of things. Number one, it gets them to really think about what they're reading. And also, when you read, you're exposed to a lot of language and concepts that you wouldn't normally be exposed to in just day-to-day conversation, because the language of books is a lot more complex, and the vocabulary and the syntax and the grammar is a lot more complex than day-to-day language. So if you have someone who doesn't spend a lot of time reading, they tend to be less advanced when it comes to their language skills. So spending a lot of time reading does give you a leg up from that standpoint, and that is going to make it easier for you to do well in school and things like that, and to give you that language that's going to help you in more academic and more challenging environments. So if you have someone who doesn't like to read, the challenge is that a lot of times they're not reading a lot because maybe they aren't familiar with some of the vocabulary in the books and it's hard for them to understand what's going on. And so it's not as fun. And if something's difficult for you and not enjoyable to you because it's hard for you, then a lot of times you don't want to do it. But the problem is that when you're not spending a lot of time reading, you don't get practice reading, you don't ever get good at it. And then that means that you've got these people over here that are spending a lot of time reading and enjoying it. And so their language is increasing. And then you have people over here where they're not spending a lot of time reading because they are, their language skills, maybe they're not as familiar with some of that vocabulary and they're not reading. So they're kind of staying here because they're not reading. And then this other group is growing and growing. And then that gap widens over time. So it is definitely worthwhile, even if you have a child that doesn't love to read or struggles with it, to get them exposed to the language of books sooner rather than later. And honestly, a lot of times what I've seen is that sometimes when there are attention issues, they are compounded by language issues, because if the words are hard and you have to really concentrate on the language that you're hearing, then it's going to be even harder for you to pay attention. So improving language skills can actually have an impact on your ability to pay attention and focus. And this can carry over to academic environments as well. So obviously, the main thing is that reading with your kids is so important, and real reading and real interactions with your kids, and not just, like putting them on a device, is going to be key. Now, having said all of that, if you have that stuff in place and you're doing those types of things and you're giving your kids those types of experiences, it's fine to layer technology on top of that. So if you use it as something that's a tool to amplify what you're already doing, then that's where it can be beneficial, or just, maybe not absolutely necessary, but totally fine if you want to let your kids use some apps and things like that. Because think about it, it's like, what if you can't sit down with your kids because you're trying to make dinner or clean something up, and it's like, just everybody sit for a minute so that I can get this stuff together. Well, yeah, I mean, it obviously, if they're going to be just sitting there, or if they're going to be doing something that's not educational, sure, it doesn't hurt to have them go on a device, and you think, okay, if they're going to be on it anyways, they might as well be doing something productive. So what I recommend, and the main features that I recommend if you're going to look at apps for, again, any kind of focus academic type skills, is just apps that read books to your kids. Because if you have a child that maybe doesn't like to read a lot, if they are listening to an audiobook, or even sometimes there are storybooks that have, like, the stories being read, but then there's also a scene being narrated as well. They're still, if your child is listening to that language, they're getting it auditorily, so they're still being exposed to that vocabulary. They're just not reading it. So that's actually going to improve language skills as well. There is something really powerful about them having to read and process without seeing some kind of a narration and without just listening to it. It is a different skill, but just listening to it and listening to that more difficult vocabulary, if that vocabulary is beyond where their reading level is, just having them listening to it can be really powerful. So any type of screen reader, or something that reads a story to your kids, or even something simple like Audible, if you have an older child who might not want to, some of the apps with storybooks are more designed for younger kids. So if you want to get on some of those apps that read audiobooks, then that might be something that is a good option for a teen. I know that a lot of people, when they're adults, they just realize, I am way more likely to consume content if I'm listening to it besides just reading. And they know that they're just going to be able to listen to things more when they're driving, when they're doing, when they're cleaning or whatever. So that is a good habit, and that is a good option if you do have an older child, something that's a little more mature and age appropriate, that is going to get them in the habit of using their device in a way that's beneficial, instead of just, messing around on an app or something and doing something that's less productive. So if you are going to use an app, that would be something that I would recommend. There are a bunch of good meditation apps out there and things like that if you wanted to do something for relaxation. Again, even if you just Google meditation apps, there's tons of different options. Again, with things like that, with meditation and relaxation, you could technically just sit there and do it. You don't need an app, but if an app helps you guide yourself through it, that's fine as well. So again, any of those things that I think Calm is one of them for meditation apps. I don't personally use a meditation app, but I know a lot of people that do. So those types of things would be fine for kids as well. So those are my thoughts on using apps. Again, remember that it is something that is not a replacement for the things that are really important and essential. It's more something that you can use to layer on to what you're already doing. And now more than ever, I think it's really important because, again, we've all been stuck inside with our families for a really long time. And for your own sanity, I think that sometimes it is good to have some options like this to layer onto what you're already doing so that you can give yourself a rest as well. So that is my recommendation for apps and using apps, just the whole topic of that when it comes to improving attention and focus. Before I wrap up, I did want to mention that we are still in the beta period for my executive functioning program for parents. So what it is that it is a 12-week self-led program that will walk you through how to build executive functioning skills in your kids. And if you aren't familiar with what executive functioning skills are, they are the skills that enable you to engage in sustained focus and attention and engage in strategic problem-solving behavior. So signs and symptoms that your child might benefit from working on executive functioning skills would be if they have a hard time with just independent tasks that you would expect them to do at their age. So for example, if you tell them go upstairs and get ready for bed and they have a hard time orchestrating that, or they get distracted throughout the process, or they do it in a way that's inefficient or takes forever, or if they need a lot of nagging and hand-holding with basic things like that you would expect them to do for their age, then that is a sign that executive functioning might be an issue. Additionally, if they have a hard time getting their things organized, like getting their backpack organized, getting their homework turned in on time, doing basic things around the house like making themselves a meal, figuring out how long it takes to plan something and figure out how to have a sense of time, or even just being able to regulate their emotions and think rationally and problem solve when little bobbles happen throughout the day. So let's say that they planned to do one thing and they realize that plan is not going to work because something came up, and they've got to problem solve and figure out another way to accomplish what they were trying to do. Like they go downstairs and they are out of a certain ingredient, or the cereal isn't in the place that it normally is in the kitchen, and they don't know how to figure out how to get something else for breakfast, for example. So if they have a hard time working through basic routines like that, or managing things that require sustained focus, all of this falls under the window of executive functioning skills. So if you have a child that struggles to pay attention and focus and just stay accountable to things like that, especially this might be something that has really come out with all of the online learning that's going on this year. All of that will be addressed. I will coach you through how to build those skills so that your child can be more independent and self-sufficient, so that they can build the skills that they need now that are eventually going to benefit them when they are adults. So I will post in the comments. Actually, I'll post it right now. Oops, hold on. I will post a link to that program. Again, it's in beta, which means that it's brand new with cutting edge material, and we are letting our first members in. So you can check it out and learn how to join. I just posted that in the comments below, so you can check out that program for parents. All right. So thanks so much, everybody, for listening.